Minister, last week the Dáil passed a Social Democrats motion to provide a €20 weekly cost of disability payment in the upcoming budget, which recognised the additional cost of disability. Individuals and families dependent on disability allowance, invalidity pension and domiciliary care allowance and other payments desperately need this increase. Given that the government has already agreed to this increase, can you outline your plans to implement this in the forthcoming budget?
Thank you, Deputy. The Indecon Cost of Disability report identified that additional costs of disability is a wider issue than income supports and run across a number of areas of expenditure. These include housing, equipment, aids and appliances, care and assistance services, mobility, transport, communications, medicines and additional living expenses. The cost of disability can be defined as the amount it costs a person with a disability to achieve the same standard of living as a person without a disability. There is not a single typical cost of disability. Rather, there is a spectrum from low to high additional costs depending on individual circumstances. As the findings of the research have implications for so many areas of public policy and extends beyond the remit of the Department of Social Protection, a whole-of-government perspective is needed to address the cost of disability. That is why the Government referred the report to the National Disability Inclusion Strategy Steering Group, which is chaired by the Minister of State with responsibility for disability. This group comprises of relevant departments, agencies, a disability stakeholder group and people with disabilities. The group will consider and monitor recommended actions required by the various government departments biannually. A number of the measures I introduced as part of Budget 2022 in support of people with disabilities and their carers address some of the findings of the report and will go towards alleviating some of the costs experienced. These include a combination of increases to income disregards, core weekly payment rates and supports to employers. My department is also committed to developing and consulting on a straw man proposal for the restructuring of long-term disability payments. The main objective is to simplify the system and remove anomalies. The straw man will also take account of the cost of disability report when developing future options as part of this work.
Deputy.
Yeah, and I agree with the wider cost of disability highlighted in the Indecon report. We know from your department's own report that additional costs faced by individuals with disabilities on average range from $8,700 to $12,300 annually. And we also know that nearly 40% of those not working due to disability are at risk of poverty, and that figure is 3 times higher than the general population. While all families are facing a cost of living crisis, it is being more acutely experienced by disabled people, given their already additional costs. With the pandemic unemployment payment, the government established that €350 is the rate of payment individuals should receive, yet disability allowance remains only a fraction of that at €208. Our motion last week, agreed to by the government, also called for at least a €15 increase in the disability allowance. So you mentioned an increase in the core rates. I'm wondering what increase are you looking at in the next budget at the moment? And just an answer to my first question on the cost of disability rate, which is separate to the core rates of social welfare allowance. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you. Well, just to say first of all, there's no recommendation in the Indecon report to do this, to increase. They're saying, it actually said that the worst outcome for people with disabilities would be a little to everyone. That's not what we should be doing. We need to target it. You know, we're looking at doing something better. And we're looking at, as I said earlier, we're looking at, you know, a tiered approach to disability payments. So, for example, persons with a profound disability who might never be able to work would get a higher level of payment than a person with a more moderate disability who is able to work. And I think that's a much fairer approach, and I think it's a sensible approach, and it means resources are targeted to those with the greatest need. But this isn't without its challenges either, because naturally everybody's going to want a higher payment. So what my department is working on at present is a straw man on what this payment structure might look like, and the work's ongoing, and as I said, it's very complex, and I want to get it right. And sorry, time's up. Sorry.
Deputy.
Thanks, Minister. And you keep referring to the Indicon report, and like I said, I agree with it. You say that they recommend targeted support rather than a bit to everybody. That's what the motion was calling for, €20 cost of disability payment targeted towards those people who need it the most. But there's also your department's own report, and the Social Democrats motion also called for an action plan to implement that cost of disability report. It outlined the scale of barriers faced by people with disabilities, obstacles which are only increasing with the cost of living crisis. But it is only an account of the situation, and it demands an action plan for a strategic and well-resourced response to these systematic issues. The action plan to implement the disability capacity review is taking too long, but at least there is one. So my last question, even though answers to the other two would be good as well, is there going to be an action plan in response to the cost of disability report? It was only after sustained pressure that the report itself was published, but will it require the same pressure for you to develop the action plan to go with it?
Minister.
Thank you. Well, Deputy, as I said, Minister Anne Rabbitte is heading up a cross-government department committee, and she's leading it, the whole of government response through the Disability Inclusion Strategy Steering Group, which she chairs. And in fairness to Anne, she's pushing that work on. She's a huge advocate, a strong advocate, and she's hugely passionate around the issue of disability. And in my department, we are looking at the recommendations around the cost of disability payment. And as I said to you before, we're going to develop a strawman proposal on that. But I don't want to do that without consulting with the stakeholders, and we will do that. Now, regarding the budget, I haven't been found wanting in the last budget in terms of supporting people with disabilities. I'm not going to tell you what's in the next budget, but you can be sure that that I'm going to obviously look across the board and how I can look at, particularly with people with disabilities. But again, that's something that's part of the budget negotiations. As I said, I wasn't found wanting in the last budget. I changed a number of things, and then, of course, I changed Catherine's law, where people who had secured a scholarship could go on to do their masters, and those were changes that I made, and I'm very conscious of the challenges facing people with disabilities, but I'm also very conscious that you have profound, you have moderate, and you have mild, and I want to target those who need it most with the most supports, and those who need it less don't need as much, if you know what I'm saying. So
Thanks,
that's what I want to do.
Our next question is in the name of Deputy Burke.